We are here today to talk about the steady and unprecedented growth of stand-up paddleboarding, or SUP, as both a cultural phenomenon as well as a skill and social phenomenon. So, with me today, go right down the line, we have
I'm Hal Ashman. I own and operate a stand-up paddleboard school in Baltimore, Maryland.
Tyler Street, paddleboarding for about 5 years and teaching for 3 as an ACA Level 1 instructor.
I am Shauna Greenstein. I'm an ACA Level 2 stand-up paddleboard instructor and an ACA Level 1 sea kayak instructor. I teach on flatwater and also leading up teaching students to get onto whitewater.
I'm Josh Finch, and I'm ACA paddleboard Level 1 instructor.
I'm Kaylee Jasinski. I've been paddleboarding for about 5 years, teaching for 2, and I'm the director of our stepdog program.
I'm Mikey Davis. I am a flat water stand-up paddleboard instructor.
Excellent. So what we're going to be talking about is the lifestyle of the SUP culture, why it draws people and the kind of individual it can draw. And to start us off, we'll make a couple of analogies so we can kind of understand why this is important and the kind of phenomena that we're seeing as compared to other cultures and adventure sports. So we'll start by saying that SUP is to water sports as the snowboarding movement was to snow sports about 2 decades ago. So I'd like to hear everybody's thoughts on that, and as well as the other side, the workout factor of SUP would be Nordic skiing to snow sports. So I'm just going to have you guys weigh in down the line.
Well,
Start.
I'll take that one. So I think you're right, Tyler. I think there is some really strong analogy to SUP right now and the way snowboarding hit the snow sports world, let's say 15 years ago, even 20 years ago, like 95. It was not peaked yet, but it was going like gangbusters. All of a sudden skiing was not a topic, snowboarding was the whole topic. And everybody from the grommet age, the 8, 9, 10, 11-year-olds, to the entire teenage spectrum, to a lot of the 20-somethings, had to be on a snowboard. They had to learn it, and then they had to own one, and that was going to be a big part of their identity. And I'm definitely seeing that with SUP, but I'm not seeing it in the same way in terms of age. I think it's going to trickle down really fast, and I'm actually watching, even the past few months, that trickle-down effect to the teens and the sub-teens. But I don't think it started there, the way that snowboarding had a lot of strength in that age group. I think where it's starting is in the 20s and in the 30-somethings, but in a similar way. Like, it's just ramping up so fast, nobody knows what's going to happen next, and we're all kind of trying to figure it out day by day. So I'm seeing that kind of growth and excitement, and probably haven't seen anything like that since snowboarding hit the U.S. culture.
So I also teach snowboarding in the winter, and I think that the comparisons between, it's interesting, right, because we're talking about sort of culturally, are these two on similar trajectories, but strangely they're also sort of a physically similar behavior. It's you and your board, and the stance is often similar. It's kind of interesting. And what you're saying about age, how I didn't get on a snowboard until I was 36. And it was really interesting learning that as a mid to late 30s woman. There are very few, so it's primarily guys, and if they're women, they tend to be young women. So it's interesting to be learning at that age. And it's hard to learn anything at that age, but one of the most exciting things I find as a teacher is actually accessibility. And by that, I don't just mean accessibility in terms of physical accessibility, but accessibility, whether people feel they belong in a certain arena, whether or not people feel like they can look at a sport like snowboarding or like paddleboarding and feel that it's something that they can access. And it could definitely be a physical issue, or it could definitely be sort of an emotional impediment, whether or not they feel they can get and claim that. And so I find one of the most exciting parts of my job, both in the winter and in the summer, is making everybody feel like they are more than welcome. They are really part of what stand-up paddleboard is, and that it's something that is in fact, I also teach sea kayaking, and I find, in many ways, I find stand-up paddleboarding more accessible than sea kayaking, and I love bringing people into that and sort of surmounting people's own self-judgment and self-exclusion out of that sport. So that in that way, for me, teaching both of them, that's what I find most satisfying. Making people feel at home.
Josh?
So the original thing was, now they're comparing snowboard popularity to SUP's popularity.
Right.
And I would say I agree on that. It's a little different though, because if you're not paying attention to the paddleboard or to the snowboard stuff when you're down, I'm originally from Florida, so it's a little different when you come up here. It's you didn't notice too much of a big change, but trying out snowboarding, because when I moved up here, I started trying out snowboarding and comparing all the new stuff that's up here compared to down there. And snowboarding, when I'm teaching paddleboarding, it's easy to say, have you been on a board? And if you've compared it to snowboarding, it's real easy to simulate or to put those two sports like identical. Like if you have balance, you can kind of figure out how to lean to one side of your board or the other side of your board, and you can kind of match things up to help people relate to it. So it's pretty easy to say that they could be just as popular, because you're doing the same thing, except for now you're doing something that's closer than driving an hour away. Now maybe this time it's closer to the water, or it's a lake, or if you wanted to go fishing, because now I know a couple friends that like go fishing a lot. So it's changing and it's growing, and paddleboard is becoming more popular too, because now everybody's experimenting with it and adding sails to them, or adding like a chair to it or something like that. So now you have like a million different crazy cool opportunities. So it's not so much all in the sport too, or how big a competition. Now you can add into your own characteristics if you want to throw an Adirondack chair on it. Like we had someone come in and paddle in with the Adirondack chair that they found in the marsh. And
so
then
you don't have an Adirondack chair in your snowboard?
Yeah, so you can, yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's just evolves and it grows, and I could easily see saying that it could be the same popularity as snowboarding, just because there's so many different angles you can come at it. You can come at it through your sports, through customizing it, to experimenting with who knows what, adding sails to it, see how fast you can go on it, and then take it into a race and all that stuff. So the diversity in which ways that it can go is just really cool, and it's real easy to say that it's about gaining the same popularity as in a similar sport, especially in the winter compared to the water.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think paddleboarding is definitely, like Shauna said, it's just way more accessible. I snowboard too. I don't think it would be as easy to just throw somebody on a snowboard and let them go down the mountain if that was their first time, but a lot of people that we have who come out paddleboarding, it still has that cool, sexy factor of like snowboarding or surfing, but we can get them out there a lot quicker, and like Josh said, there's just so much more you can do with it which you can't do on a snowboard, whether it's a sail, where you can take it, whether it's like whitewater, a lake, ocean. So I think it definitely has the cool factor of boarding, but unlike a lot of the other sports, whether it's skateboarding, wakeboarding, we can get people out there a lot faster and have them be successful and feel like, they really know what they're doing.
Alright. I do want to say one thing that Kaylee reminded me of. I've read articles and seen pictures that people have kind of played with snowboarding and what a snowboard can actually do, whether it's in terms of shortening them or throwing a sail on them. I've seen that. Somebody put a windsurf sail
I've
on a
seen that.
snowboard.
It's awesome.
It was pretty awesome to watch, but overall it was a flop. Sorry to the guy who invented that. But, you know, even though people have tried adapting the snowboard, it didn't work. Whereas with paddleboarding, it really does seem to be working and catching on. It's a real easy platform to adapt to other sports and kind of have that hybrid capability of being able to customize boards and throw different stuff on them and make it something completely different than what it was before. Going back to the point though, I do think that it really closely matches the snowboard boom in terms of popularity. I mean, really, we haven't seen such a surge in popularity of water sports since water skiing was big in like the late 70s, early 80s. I might be off on the time. That was before my time, when water skiing was huge. But with the rise in popularity of the stand-up paddleboard movement, we've really seen the return back to the water and water sports, despite there being plenty of other sports that have come up and kind of became popular in between. You know, there's wakeboarding, you could definitely do that, but we never saw such a big momentum that we see in stand-up paddleboarding today. And springboarding off of what Shauna said, I really agree with the accessibility of stand-up paddleboarding, what you were saying with that. I've seen people of all ages learning it and having success with it. So, you know, it doesn't matter if you're young. You know, it's a cool, hip thing to be on a paddleboard right now, but you don't have to be, quote unquote, a cool, hip individual. You don't have to be with it. You don't have to be down with the cool crowd. You can be anyone, any age, any physical ability level, and still be able to get out on the water, learn a really interesting sport, and kind of grow yourself and your abilities on the SUP. It's really cool to watch.
So I think we're seeing similar trends of the gotta have it now mentality, and then with what Kaylee said in passing, that it looks cool, it looks sexy. You can be falling off the board, but as long as you get that one moment of standing and somebody takes a picture of it, because remember, it doesn't exist unless it's posted on Facebook.
No pics, no proof.
Then you get this whole I'm a supper, I paddleboard mentality behind it. And this is where the direction I want to go with the next analogy. We'll go through it very quickly. That SUP is the four-door wrangler of this culture. That what Jeep did with creating the original Jeep, and you know, it was this awesome off-road vehicle, but you had to choose: do I want to have storage space, or do I want to have a back seat? And it was like that for decades. Then they finally came up with the four-door Wrangler. Suddenly you could have a family car, but still have an off-road vehicle and still look awesome and still live that lifestyle of an off-roader, but then take the kids to soccer practice. And so it really appealed to that middle age, but not the same middle age that SUP does. Does anybody feel any different or see any similarities there?
Well, I would agree with you, Tyler. I think that what so far everyone's been describing is the difference between sports that have big barriers to entry and not. And I would not have predicted this, and I didn't come close to predicting it. When I first saw the first stand-up paddleboards happening, I wasn't sure about it at all. But compared to every other water sport that I know and that I teach or have been deeply involved in, there's no question stand-up has fewer barriers to entry. The learning curve is really fast for most everyone. The equipment can be pricey, but it's not super involved. You don't need the best equipment. You can use just about any stand-up paddleboard other than maybe a race board and probably have a good first experience. So I guess what I'm seeing is in 3-4 years now of of watching our school grow and watching the popularity of SUP completely taking over our kayak school and rental and our sailing operations in terms of popularity, and watching a lot of the people who we thought were really hardcore one-sport, water sport people slowly getting off the fence and shifting over and trying it out, when in the first year they would have never done that, and then the second year they still would have never done it. Now it's third or fourth year SUP, and we're seeing those people realize, wow, that is kind of cool, and I don't have to completely leave my identity and take on an entirely different identity. It's just a cool thing to do. So I think it goes to what you were saying, Shauna, that there's definitely an identity attachment that happens quickly in SUP. I don't think it happens as quickly on a kayak or on a lot of other water sports, but my observations have been people try SUP regardless of age, regardless of skill level, regardless of whether they took lessons, and a lot of those people get attached to the experience. And some of them may go to the race end of the spectrum, some of them may go to the yoga and the fitness end of the spectrum, some of them may just do it for themselves and for nobody else, and some of them are doing it purely for Facebook, profile shots. But regardless of all that, there's an identity thing happening, and a lot of what I think it's about is that when we grow up in an American culture, a lot of us have this thing when we see the surfing world as kids, and we think that's kind of the epitome of cool. Of all things that are cool, just like the Jeep analogy, surfing, it's hard to take cool out of surfing. I don't think you can, I don't think anybody's trying to. But when you see a stand-up paddleboard, it's as close to a surfboard as a lot of people will ever get. And either that's because they're just not proximate enough to any water, let alone waves, let alone surfing. But we do know that more than 80% of the US population is within, I think it's 30 to 50 miles of water, right? That's where all of our major cities are, and our ports, and that's where people live. So that doesn't mean they're close to waves, which means they're probably not going to be surfers. But if that much of the population is that close to water, then all of those people have a shot at learning to stand up paddleboard. And if they have a shot at doing that, and there's an identity attachment, it's just cool, let alone it feels good, and it helps you stay fit, and it keeps you feeling young. There's so few barriers to entry, and there's so much good at the end of the day. I think that's why this sport is going crazy.
So when you said the four-door analogy, it made me think of how I have actually loaded up my SUPs, all of my SUPs, like a SUV. So one of the things that I've done, and this is, when you talk about, there's a lot of different ways to get into the sport, whether you're on flat water, whether you're on surf, whether you're on whitewater. I tend to be more of a slow, all-day plotter. I think in many ways I'm not fast, I am strong, I can just go and go. And, so I came to stand-up paddleboard from a sea kayak background, and I remember the exact moment I found out about this sport. I had never wanted, I have a sister who's a surfer, but I never really wanted to be a surfer. But it was after a lesson, and somebody said, remember, there's lots of ways you can get on the water, encouraging people to just get out there. Said you could be in your kayak, or don't forget, you can always stand up on a stand-up paddleboard. And I said, it was like a record screeching, like one of those triple takes in a comedy. And I was like, you can do what now? And there was something that made so much sense to me. We literally went to, I was like, we have to go look at those. Today, right now. We went to the store, looked at them, and I was like, I just saw it leaning up against a wall, and I became obsessed. It was the same way I felt about snowboarding, but I was obsessed with the stand-up paddleboard. And, but what I wanted to do with it is not something that a lot of people want to do. When I'm on my board, well, I don't think I look sexy. Usually I have about 40, 50 pounds of stuff and maybe a dog. And I'm hopefully going 15, 20 miles that day. And that, in terms of the way that I've approached the sport, I think that what's made me kind of continue and keep going back to it and trying to get better and trying to refine my stroke and trying to find people to do it with is that there's parts of it that make so much sense to me, and I've been able to really create exactly what I want from the sport. So, one of the first things I did with I bought a board. It's you can surf it definitely, but I carefully carved out the foam and put on in little circles so that I could attach
For your tie
deck
downs.
line and tie downs, and I can put 40 pounds on that thing, and it rides better than when it's unladen. And I can take it through the surf zone and go out on shop, and I have my tent and some water and food, and I can just go. And that is, to me, that's one of the best times I can have, is to be out just going like a train, going and going. but it's funny when you said when you said that 4-door analogy, I was like, oh yeah, like the way I can put everything that I own on the back of my board.
It's kind of a duo. Or it can
It
be a
is. It
duo.
can be a dual, and because the design of boards, and I know we'll talk about that later, because there's so many different boards, people are fishing off of them, and those things are, well, 1,000,000 pounds, but they're incredibly
Decked
stable.
out.
But they're decked out. You've got a cooler, you've got your seat, you've got
Rod holders.
rod holders. I didn't remember the name of that. Anyway.
Can I chime in on what Shauna was saying? What I've seen with stand-up paddle boarding, it's not just an activity or a sport, it's a hobby. And when people find a hobby, whether it's new to them or not, as soon as they get acquainted with it, they don't just dip their toe in the water, they dive head first, full on, they completely immerse themselves in that hobby. And I feel like that's one of the coolest things about SUPs, is that, you don't just buy the board and a paddle and that's it. You're buying decking lines, of course, they come with them. Thank God. But you're buying all this cool stuff. You're buying like the fanciest life jacket that goes around your hip like a fanny pack. Or you're buying a cooler and all this stuff to load up all that stuff that you want to put on your board. You totally get into it. You're buying multiple stuff. You're buying a carbon fiber paddle. So it's not just like a basketball.
Well,
You don't get into the sport and buy a basketball and go to the local hoop. You buy everything that you can afford because it's that cool.
It's not just that, Mikey, is that you're upgrading. Maybe you started with the
Right.
$300 board and the $5 paddle that you found floating somewhere,
You
but
use
then you
that
keep
old new
keep
paddle.
upgrading. you as you get more into the sport, you want the next best thing, and as the sport continues to evolve, the next best thing is always coming out,
Right.
and you keep going that way. So before we get too far away from this culture analogy, did you guys have anything to weigh in on?
Yeah, I can go off a couple of things. Al over here was talking about kind of how it's cool and can be related maybe with like surfing, have that kind of cool aspect to it, such as surfing had. And then you got Shauna over here is going outside and spending time in nature. The same thing with me is whether I'm floating around on like a piece of wood that I made into a board because I couldn't afford to go buy the fancy one, or I worked real hard to like work in the yard to get a paddle so I can paddle that and just get out there and get in touch with nature. So to me, it's also cool instructing people is, hey, you can come check out this board, you can get in shape. But the coolest thing is now you're getting back in touch with nature and you're understanding what's going on. And a lot of times in our culture too, we have a lot of like recycling stuff and a lot of just people are going organic and they're understanding more about nature and about how it affects you and how you can affect it. And people are just enjoying being in nature too. Like when I'm on my board, I'm not so much thinking about all this stuff. I'm just thinking about, look at all this stuff I'm exploring and look at all these new places that I really wouldn't be able to go if I was just walking around on land or if I was sitting down low in a kayak. Because I mean, I can sit down on my board if I want, but I could also stand up in a kayak. And maybe when we get a chance to, like at my work, when we're not working so hard, we go out and ride on a strap a sail to it and go out and test it out on the waves and check out other things. So it's, to me, it's a lot of just having fun and just going exploring and just being out in nature and just kind of feeling like that's where I originally came from and stuff like that. So you can be real cool with it. You can just go and explore and camp, and you can just go outside, and then you're getting a good workout too. So you're staying healthy and you feel fit, which is another thing people want to be fit too. So it's an easy way from going to the gym. You just pay your one membership when you buy it, and then you just got your gym membership for the rest of the time. And you just go explore, and you can take people out to places that they've never been and show them waterfalls or show them like reptiles, like turtles and stuff like that. So it's a place, a way to get out in nature too, and just see what's going on. Plus people picking up stuff in the trails, like picking up garbage. It's cool to say, well, now I'm in nature again, and new people are understanding with the new idea that maybe they should pick up some of the garbage because this is where they're going to be playing it too. So kind of like a nature vibe too, as well as popularity and just exploring all that kind of stuff. So I want to make sure that was it.
I guess just going off what both Josh and Shauna said, there's just so much versatility. And I guess going back to the four-door comparison, like, the Jeep where you take the doors off and it's it's sexy, but not everybody, it's not going to fit everyone's needs, especially if you're a mom with kids. So paddleboarding is more like the four-door, like you can have the sexy aspect, or if you want to get, more in touch with nature, or go on a long fishing expedition. You can do all, and most of the time you can do it on the same board. You get kind of a mid-grade, and there's just so much more you can do with it. And even, you can do that with a kayak too, but like a board is so much lighter. There's so many more options where you're carrying it or, strapping on your car. I just feel like compared to some of the other sports, there's just so much you can do with it with the same equipment. There's not a lot that you really have to figure out. I think that's why it's gaining so much popularity from so many different crowds.
I'm glad you talked about the ease of getting it on your vehicle to go to the water, because not everyone can lift a 60-pound recreational kayak, but they can lift a 25-pound board. It's certainly far easier to get up there, even on taller SUVs. I drive my little Corolla, and that's great because I can put anything there and it's right here at my face level. But I also have my Jeep, where having to put kayaks on there, it's a lot harder. But I can throw 4 boards on there, no problem. And Josh, I'm glad you actually brought up the getting in touch with nature thing. I also pulled an SUP yoga instructor, Mary Kay Benny, who gave me some feedback about when she's out there teaching her yoga classes, she's trying to get people to get in touch with something bigger than just themselves and just the board or even just the class. They're outside of a studio, they're out in the water trying to be in touch with everything. And on top of that, she also cited that when people get introduced to a sport, particularly one that requires access to waterways and healthy water, clean water, suddenly their activism and conservationism goes through the roof. And I think this is a super big thing, that the kind of individual, which is almost everybody, that SUP is drawing, it introduces you to another culture, that conservation culture, to keep the waterways clean, to keep the boat ramps and marinas and beaches where you're going to be launching from clean and pristine. And that's kind of an even larger philanthropic goal of the entire community, which I think is really fantastic. So I'm glad you brought that up, Josh. Thank you. So my last...
Go into the four-door analogy.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just to kind of further what Kaylee and Josh were saying, when I go out on a stand-up paddleboard, it really depends on what kind of mood I'm in, what I'm looking for. I could go out and I can get in touch with nature, or I could just go on a relaxing paddle just to kind of escape the stresses of like a normal day. Or I could go out there, I can play around and have fun. So it has this multitude of like intrinsic benefits that you can get from one board, and then extrinsically or externally, you can use that one board to do different types of activities. You could take that one board into the waves and surf it. You can take it onto the flat water and explore. You can take it across the lake to the other side to go exploring. So it's really a catch-all, like you said, with the four-door Jeep. You can kind of take that one vehicle and do whatever your heart wants that day. I think that's cool.
So the last analogy that I wanted to cover, and this one's actually very important to me. I've been climbing for almost 15 years, far longer than I've been doing any of these paddle sports. And the bouldering movement of the late 90s to now, where bouldering is extreme ease of entry. You buy a pad, shoes, and chalk, and just go, is great, which is why it was so popular, because it didn't require this huge learning curve, and you could do it a lot more locally than having to travel to various locations for longer roped up climbing. But also the social aspect. that you could do it with a large group versus just you and one partner or just a couple partners. So this large group mentality that everyone can go and have fun, no matter what your skill level. That's another thing that I saw a lot of similarities to with paddleboard, was that you could be the best racer out there, but you still get joy from taking somebody who's never been and seeing their first experience on the boards the exact same way, the exact social aspect of seeing somebody else's first experience on a rock, surrounded by friends. And that's not to say that wakeboarding or kayaking or windsurfing or sailing doesn't have a social aspect to it, but the ease of entry is what makes it a more sociable. And you're not confined to a boat. You know, you can hop boards, swap, try out somebody else's craft. You can turn around a full 360 and not have to turn the actual boat around. And so it just opens itself up to this social side, which I think is another key ingredient to why it's so popular. So I'm open to rebuttals and suggestions.
Well, it takes me right back to the surfing conversation. I think it's for the same reasons that you're describing why surfing has been huge for years and years, and why a sport like surfing doesn't necessarily go in big waves of popularity and then drop and big. I think surfing is popular for a lot of great reasons, but accessibility is weak. And while the culture of surfing is largely social, in my opinion, the only thing that's missing from surfing is accessibility. Otherwise, I think a ton more people would surf. So if you look at an SUP, you have the problem solved, because it makes accessibility not a problem. Other than the cost of the board, whether you're buying it or renting it or borrowing it. Once you've got the equipment, you don't need the waves, you don't need the perfect conditions, you just need water. It can be big water, it can be small water, it can be flat, choppy, or wavy, but accessibility is problem solved with a stand-up paddleboard. So you're taking, I think, the biggest challenge of surfing popularity and knocking it out and getting the benefit of that social reality, which is you get off the water, you come back to land, and you have something to talk about, something to share with people, and chances are it's going to be a positive experience. And even if it isn't, it's still something to share.
You still got a story out of it.
Right, you've got a story, and I think it's going to be a more positive story in general, because if I took any 10 people and put them on surfboards and threw them out in the waves, and an hour later brought them back on the beach, and then I took the exact same 10 people and put them on an SUP and put them out in any water other than big waves, I have a feeling that 10 people on SUPs would have probably more positive conversations about their experiences than the same 10 on surfboards. So there's no question in my mind, the social aspect is a critical ingredient, and I think it solves some of the challenges that other great sports like surfing still have to deal with every day.
So when you're talking about you can put them on any water, and going back to the whole bouldering and climbing analogy, I can climb the crummy rock in my backyard or 5 minutes away from me and still get a great experience. I don't know it's crummy because it's my first experience. But then when I travel, maybe to some really nice, scenic, let's just say Florida, beautiful water, suddenly I see what more the world has to offer. So I can see that side of it. Anyone else to add in?
So I'm going to tell a bouldering story that everybody's going to take the wrong way, but I'm going to tell it anyway. You ready? I'm a terrible rock climber, but I have a lot of heart. Let's just say that. I have a lot of heart. And I will never forget, I was out bouldering with my brother-in-law, who's very good. And there was something that I just really wanted to get. And so I was like hanging there and really reaching for it. And I couldn't make the move. And suddenly, someone was holding my butt up in the air. That's the part I thought everybody's going to take wrong.
It's called a power spot.
Yeah, exactly. And like, that was the experience of bouldering that I really loved. I didn't know this person. They were like, I can help you make this move. Just by like giving you a little, I like the word power spot, I didn't know that.
Yes.
And in terms of the social aspect of SUPing versus supping versus surfing, surfing is, I always say, like, waves are a it's a limited resource. So people want to keep it to themselves, and actually some climbing lines are.
It's true.
And
I think it's true in every culture.
Yeah, you want people off your line because you're like, that's the only one I can do, and I want to do that one. Whereas bouldering, it's more amorphous. There's more people. There's more lines you can do. Supping, more people can be out on the water at the same time, and I feel like maybe there's more of a supportive community. Like, hey, that looks awesome. You look so much more stable than the last time I saw you, or that's really cool. Where did you learn that move? Or can I show you something? Or do you want to try my board? Do you want to try my new paddle? Do you want to see my new stuff? And I really do get that feeling more on, and it just reminded me of that sort of supportive bouldering.
Right. It's a
community.
supportive culture.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a great observation, actually. I hadn't thought about that at all.
With what
The nature of the crowd, regardless of who they are. In surfing, for sure.
right.
In skiing and snowboarding, for sure.
Mhm.
And in a lot of other sports, there is a certain possessiveness
Of fresh corduroy,
of
fresh
right,
powder.
of fresh whatever, exactly. And it's understandable. And if you're involved in those sports, you can become that way very, very easily. And then you want to protect that turf, that territory. And if you're out there that day, you want it to be yours and not necessarily everyone else's at that same moment. But with SUP, I have never seen that kind of protective nature, even in the people who are incredibly, like, zealously protected
Yeah.
with some of these other sports, because there is enough water to go around. So that's a big difference between a lot of these other sports, whether they're land sports or water sports or whatever. And I've never thought about that. It's another barrier to entry that's not a barrier. It's just another problem solved. Why would you not try something if everyone around you is encouraging you to try it? Versus seeing how protective and possessive some people can be in another sport and feeling intimidated by that. Like, I don't want to piss off somebody because they got in their way because they know how to surf a 10-foot wave and I don't. I mean, so there's a lot of reasons why people wouldn't try some sports. But with SUP, I have yet to hear a reason why anyone wouldn't try it.
Yeah, I think if you just go a little further with that, I've seen people come in there and they all start out at the same level and they're all kind of learning it at the same pace. And then when they're done, they've made such a friend connection, or they've learned together, that they usually go out together. Like, you don't see them like, okay, well, I'm gonna go off by myself or anything like that. So it's not like you're rowing down, you're jumping on a wave, you're taking one at a time, everybody's taking one at a time. You can all do it together. They can all learn how to paddle together, or they could all go on the same trails together. So it's easy to talk and hang out. And then if you're out there in windy waves and stuff, you guys can all ride around on little waves and stuff and paddle with them. And you can still have fun because you're both going to be all falling off and having a good time and just experiencing it. As like the other day, we had so much wind where it was like a giant wave pool. All those kids that were out there learning how to paddleboard, they were just having an awesome time, like if they were amusement park. Yet you can come on a flat water day and you just go out and relax and just lay out in the sun. So it's a good experience and it's easy to have social interaction and just have a good time out while you're out on your board and while you're out in nature. So it's pretty easy to see, especially when you're instructing. You get to see it all the time, especially when you're...
Josh, I like that you said that about when they're done their lesson, they want to come back together. And I do see that same thing in climbing. If I'm on a trip and I'm on my rest day, I'm still walking around talking to people. If I'm hurt, I'm still there talking to people. Because you want to be with everyone that does it. It draws you in. It's no fun to do it alone. It can be a lot of fun, excuse me, but it's more fun to do it with a friend or a group of friends.
Well, I think what you're saying, what I'm hearing is that whether you do it alone or not, you're compelled to share that experience with people that matter to you.
Right.
And I think we see that whether it's competitive racers or people for the first time. I know when we hosted our race a week and a half ago, we had some pretty crazy winds, and I know when I was out on the jetty, could hear the racers talking to each other, like, what lap are we on? Like, hey man, is it our time to go in? And they're supposed to be competing for a race, but like we talked about, you're not all fighting for one wave. There's plenty of water, so it's more about, you know, everyone pushing themselves, encouraging each other, and we see the same thing with brand new people, like Josh said, just that experience of learning together. So I think even in a competitive situation, it's still very socially oriented.
Yeah, I'll go. Let me start by saying that I am not a rock climber. I've never been, and I don't claim to be. Tyler, you're gonna have to take me one day. So I can get this bouldering.
Take you any day you
fully.
want. Just not during the summer when we're paddling.
Right. But what I do think that I have a pretty good grasp on are people and like social skills, and if what I'm getting from bouldering is accurate and it's a social sport, stand-up paddleboarding is definitely a social sport, and I think it's a fact of human nature that people don't want to be alone. We're social creatures. You know, it's not me in front of a camera. There's 6 of us here, and one behind the camera. Hi, Alex. And whenever somebody does something cool or something that they're proud of, they want people to take note of that. They want to be noted. You know, they want to. I don't want to say that. You know, they want to show off in a sense. You know, they want to be noticed and show off in a good sense. You know, they're not like, I'm better than you. They're like, hey, check this out. Look what I did. That's so cool. You should do it with me. And what I see people coming down, you know, hardly anyone comes down, you know, to run a SUP or to put it in a SUP on their own. You know, it's people that it's like, hey, this is me and my friend. Let's go rent some boards. And I'm like, hey, have you done this before? And there's usually one that's like, oh, well, I have. She hasn't. And taking her with me, you know, throwing her in the deep end here. I'm like, awesome, you know, get people involved in the sport. Or it's people who are like, you know, me and Kaylee, we were out in Florida and we saw it, but we didn't try it because we were too busy sport fishing or whatever Floridians do. Soaking up the rays.
What do Floridians do?
Something oranges.
something oranges, right? Something Disney, right? Okay.
But you know, people do it together. You know, I don't think I've seen one person come down for a lesson. It's like, I just decided to do this for myself. And you know, even if someone did come down solo,
met that guy. He was weird.
Even if somebody comes down solo, you know, they attract other people, and it kind of has this multiplying factor and this exponential growth. You know, like it starts with me paddleboarding, and then I tell one person, and there's 2 people, and then those 2 people tell 2 people, and then there's like 4 people, and then 8 people, and then I think that's one of the reasons why stand-up paddleboarding has had such a great momentum and exponential growth, is because it's a social sport, and people want to
Pay it forward.
They want to pay it forward, and they want to tell people about their successes and their positive experiences, and they kind of want to share that with other people, and they want to be in this group of awesome people who have fun.
Beginning, and Kaylee, I'm glad you brought up the part about the racers, even though they're actively competing against each other, they're still out chatting about the conditions, about the course, about the other racers who are behind them or in front of them, whatever. It's the same kind of experience that I feel as a competitive climber, and you saw this in Alabama at that big competition, that people who are competing directly next to you or even on the same line as you are still actively cheering you on and giving you help, advice on where to grab, how to move, because they want to see you succeed. And I think that's what it is about the SUP culture. They want to see, everyone wants to see you succeed. I see Josh do a cool trick, I want to do that cool trick, and he's going to help me do that cool trick. You know, and it kind of, it progresses from there. And then I can teach somebody else how to do that trick, and then, like Mikey said, you pay it forward. So I think that's what we're seeing as the largest driving factor, is that it's a cultural, social phenomenon, not just a cool sport. It's much bigger than that. And so that's what I think we're seeing here.